Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we have two chilling stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. First, we have the terrifying tale of Emma Daniels, who was abducted by a man she thought she could trust. What would you do if you found yourself trapped and forced to fight for your life? Could you escape? Then, we dive into the heartbreaking story of Sarah Mitchell, who was shot by her own husband in what he claims is an accident. But was it really? Or is there a much darker truth hiding behind his calm demeanor? What would you do in their shoes? How far would you go to survive? And how do you face the unimaginable betrayal of someone you love? Share your thoughts in the comments. And make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the shocking twists in these true stories. Emma Daniels never thought that a simple walk home would change her life forever. It was a quiet evening in Cleveland, Ohio, the kind of evening where the streets felt peaceful and the world seemed still. But all that tranquility was about to be shattered in the most horrifying way possible. She'd been walking back to her apartment, earbuds in, unaware of the man who had been following her for weeks. His name was Thomas Wright. To most, he seemed harmless, charming, polite, but underneath that facade lurked something far more sinister. Thomas had watched Emma from afar, patiently waiting for the moment he would strike. As Emma turned the corner near her apartment complex, Thomas moved quickly. He was on her before she even realized what was happening. A sharp hand covered her mouth. A rough arm gripped her waist, and she was dragged into the darkness. The fear hit her like a wave, choking the breath out of her chest. She tried to scream, but the sound was smothered by his hand. "Don't make a sound," Thomas hissed in her ear, his voice cold and unnerving. Emma's heart pounded in her ears as she was pulled deeper into the night. The streets that had once felt so familiar were now a maze of shadows. Thomas pushed her into a nearby alley, where an old van sat parked, its door wide open. He shoved her inside with terrifying force, slamming the door shut behind her. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the van sped off, the city's lights disappearing behind them. Tears blurred Emma's vision as she realized what was happening. She was being taken, dragged away from everything she knew. The sounds of the van's tires on the road were the only thing that filled her ears, drowning out the chaos in her mind. Inside the van, Thomas didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. He kept his eyes on her, his smile thin and dangerous. Emma could feel the weight of his gaze on her, the unspoken threat in every glance. She had no idea where she was headed, but deep down she knew this wasn't going to end well. As the van turned onto a narrow street, Emma's stomach dropped. She was heading straight into hell. The van skidded to a halt in front of a dilapidated house, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. It was the kind of place you'd cross the street to avoid. Yet here Emma was, shoved into its dark, cold interior. Her limbs were trembling, her mind racing for any means of escape, but every part of her body screamed that running was futile. Thomas dragged her inside with surprising strength. The door slammed shut behind them, and the sound echoed like a death sentence. Emma could barely catch her breath as she was forced into a dark corner of the living room. The air was thick with the musty scent of neglect, and the silence felt suffocating, as though the house itself was holding its breath. "You're going to stay here," Thomas whispered, his voice unnervingly calm. "Don't try to run. You won't get far." Emma's heart hammered in her chest. She glanced around the room, looking for anything she could use. But the house was sparse, no furniture, no light, just dark corners, and the weight of her impending doom. Suddenly, Thomas's voice cut through the silence again, colder this time. "Don't even think about trying to escape. The only way out is in a body bag." He stepped back, his laugh low and menacing as he bolted the door. Emma was alone now, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She could hear his footsteps fading as he walked away, but she knew he was still watching, lurking somewhere in the shadows. The hours felt like days. The terror never stopped. The hours dragged on in suffocating silence, each second crawling like a nightmare. Emma could feel the cold chains of fear tightening around her chest as the darkness pressed in on her. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old walls. It was as though time had come to a standstill, leaving her alone with the pounding in her head and the heavy weight of her fear. Thomas hadn't come back for what felt like an eternity. But Emma knew better than to believe he had forgot about her. Every minute she sat there, bound and vulnerable, the more she feared what he would do when he returned. In the silence, something inside her stirred an instinct to fight, to survive. She was still terrified, but a spark of defiance flickered in her mind. She couldn't just wait for him to come back and finish what he'd started. If she didn't do something now, she might never get another chance. Her eyes scanned the room for any possible escape, but it was hopeless. She was trapped. That's when she saw it. Thomas's phone resting carelessly on the floor near his bag. She could see it from where she sat, just a few feet away, and with trembling hands, she reached out, hoping against hope that this would be her lifeline. She managed to grab the phone, her heart racing as she unlocked it. Her fingers were slick with sweat, but she dialed 921-1, praying that help would come in time. Her voice, barely above a whisper, trembled as she spoke the words that could save her life. "I need help. I'm trapped." The phone trembled in Emma's hand as she pressed it to her ear, her breath shallow and ragged. The line rang twice, then a voice crackled through the static. 9-1, -1, what's your emergency? Emma's heart skipped a beat. Her voice was barely a whisper, her words stuttering with terror. I'm trapped. In a house. A man. He has me. Please. You have to hurry. The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent, a stark contrast to Emma's panic. "Where are you? Can you tell me where you are?" Emma's eyes darted around the dark, claustrophobic room. She could barely focus, her thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of fear and confusion. "I don't know. It's an old house near the laundromat. 4th Street. Please, help me." "Stay on the line with me," the dispatcher said firmly. "We're coming for you, Emma. Just stay calm." But the calmness in the dispatcher's voice only made Emma more anxious. She could feel the presence of Thomas creeping closer, like a shadow waiting to devour her. A cold dread settled over her as she heard the faint sound of footsteps from behind the door. "Emma, are you still there?" the dispatcher asked, her voice breaking through the rising panic. I'm still here," Emma whispered, barely able to speak. Her heart was in her throat as the door creaked open. The silence that followed was deafening, and Emma could hear Thomas's voice low and menacing in the next room. He was awake. "Don't think you can escape," he sneered. "You're mine now." Emma's breath hitched. Emma's pulse pounded in her ears as she clutched the phone, her hands slick with sweat. She was sure Thomas could hear her heartbeat through the thin walls, her every breath a sign of her fear. The door creaked open further, and her eyes darted to the narrow sliver of space between it and the wall, her only escape route. But the thought of trying to run was paralyzing. He was so close. Too close. "Emma," the dispatcher's voice came again, a lifeline in the storm. "You need to be quiet. We're almost there. Stay as still as you can." Emma could hear him now, his footsteps growing louder. He was moving towards her. She could almost feel the chill of his presence, creeping like a shadow through the room. Her mind raced, but she had no plan, just a raw, desperate will to survive. She glanced at the window. If she could make it there. Her breath caught in her throat as the footsteps stopped right outside the door. She froze, holding her breath, praying he didn't hear the faint hum of her phone in her hand. Then came the sound that made her blood run cold. A low laugh, followed by the unmistakable click of a taser. Emma's heart stopped. He was prepared for her. Suddenly, she heard the loud screech of tires in the distance. Police. They were here. "Please, hurry." Emma gasped into the phone, the tremble in her voice betraying her fear. The door burst open, and for a fleeting moment, she saw his twisted grin before the police swarmed in. Emma's body trembled, but it was over. She was safe. The moment the door slammed open, Emma's heart lurched in her chest. She heard the sound of heavy boots stomping across the floor, the rush of officers storming into the room. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, her body locked in a mixture of relief and terror. "Get down," one of the officers shouted. On the floor now. Emma barely registered the command as she collapsed onto the cold, dirty floor, her legs giving out beneath her. The officer who had reached her grabbed her arms gently, but firmly, pulling her into his arms. She could barely process the rush of adrenaline, her mind still swimming in the nightmare that she had just escaped. "Are you hurt?" another officer asked, his voice soft as he crouched beside her. Emma nodded, her body trembling uncontrollably. I don't know." She could still hear the faint echo of Thomas's laughter in her ears, his words echoing in the back of her mind. As the officers took control of the situation, cuffing Thomas and escorting him out of the room, Emma's eyes scanned the scene, still struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The fear in her chest was slowly subsiding, replaced by a creeping exhaustion, the toll of everything she had endured finally catching up with her. They led her outside, where paramedics were waiting to tend to her. The cool night air hit her face, the distant sound of sirens filling her ears, and for the first time in days, Emma felt the weight of her captivity lift. She was safe. She had survived. But the scars both seen and unseen would remain. Days blurred into weeks, and Emma found herself in a haze, her mind struggling to grasp the reality of what had happened. The police had worked quickly, gathering evidence from the abandoned house and arresting Thomas Wright, but nothing could erase the trauma that haunted her every waking moment. She stayed with her parents in the weeks following the rescue, surrounded by loved ones who tried to comfort her, but the weight of her experience never fully lifted. At night, the memories replayed in her mind like a broken record. His voice, his grip, the feeling of helplessness. Sometimes, she'd wake up gasping for air, as if she were still trapped in that cold, dark room. Therapy became her lifeline. Sessions with a counselor helped her work through the intense feelings of fear and shame that clung to her like a second skin. Emma was determined to heal, though the path seemed endless. Her therapist encouraged her to take it one day at a time, to not rush her recovery. Still, the trauma lingered, creeping into her thoughts when she least expected it. She couldn't help but glance over her shoulder when she was out in public, her heart racing at the sound of footsteps behind her. But Emma was strong. She wasn't the same person she had been before Thomas Wright tore apart her life, but she was learning to reclaim herself, piece by piece. Every small step forward was a victory, every moment of peace, a reminder that she was more than a survivor. She was a fighter. And she would keep fighting. The night began like any other. Sarah Mitchell, at 51 years old, had spent a long day trying to manage the unraveling threads of her once perfect life. Her husband, Michael, sat in the living room, his eyes fixed on the television, but Sarah knew better than to think he was really watching. The once successful real estate mogul had become a man broken by the weight of his debts. The mortgage, the loans, the looming bankruptcy had all seemed to suffocate him, slowly suffocating her too. That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. It had been building for weeks now, this tension that hung in the air like a thick fog. Every argument, every cold look from Michael, felt like the fuse to a bomb that was about to go off. She had tried to soothe him, to calm his frustration, but she knew it was no use. The money had run out. The house was slipping through their fingers. She poured herself a glass of wine, the bitterness of it matching the sharpness in her chest. As she sipped, the weight of everything, the uncertainty, the shame, the endless struggle pressed down on her. She wanted to scream, to throw everything away and start fresh, but she couldn't. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for her family, for her 2 daughters, whom she loved more than anything. But tonight, it felt like no one could save her from this sinking ship. Suddenly, Michael's voice broke the silence. "Do you even care?" he snapped, his words sharp as knives. Sarah flinched, the tension in the room thickening. Her throat tightened, and she took a step back, feeling her heart race. The argument escalated quickly, like a powder keg ready to explode. Michael's frustrations, his rage, finally erupted. "I've given everything," he shouted, his face turning red. "And now you're acting like this? You think I don't know what's happening? Do you think I'm not trying?" The glass Sarah had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. Michael's eyes darkened, and before Sarah could react, his hands were on her. He shoved her backward, the anger and fear in his eyes too much to comprehend. As she stumbled, he reached for the drawer where his gun was kept, a gun she had never imagined would be used like this. In a flash, the world went black. "Please no," Sarah whispered, but it was too late. The shot rang out, deafening and final. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the house, a sharp, brutal crack that shattered the night. Sarah's body jerked violently as the force of the bullet hit her chest. She gasped, blood flooding her mouth as she staggered backward, her legs buckling beneath her. The floor was cold against her skin as she collapsed, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Michael stood over her, his face a twisted mask of anger and disbelief. The gun was still in his hand, the barrel smoking. His eyes darted from the weapon to Sarah's crumpled form, as if trying to process what he had just done. But there was no remorse, no hesitation. His breath was steady, almost calm, as if it had been the most natural thing in the world. Sarah's vision blurred, her strength fading. She could feel the warmth of her own blood spreading across the floor, pooling beneath her. But even as the darkness crept in, her thoughts were clear. She wasn't going to die here. Not like this. With what little strength she had left, she turned her head toward the phone on the nightstand. Her hand trembled as she reached for it, clutching it in her fingers like a lifeline. She had to survive. For her daughters. For herself. 9-1, -1, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was a beacon of hope in the silence. I've been shot. Sarah gasped, her voice barely audible as the pain tore through her. Please, help me. Her vision flickered. Would help come in time? Sarah's vision swam, the room spinning around her. Blood poured from the wound in her chest, each breath coming harder than the last. Her hand was still gripping the phone, the cold plastic digging into her palm as she clung to it desperately. The dispatcher's voice, calm and steady, cut through the haze of pain. Stay with me, ma'am. Help is on the way. Where are you right now? I'm at home, Sarah whispered, each word feeling like it took every ounce of energy she had left. I'm in the master bedroom. Please, hurry. Michael was still standing over her, his face blank, eyes glazed with a cold detachment. The gun had fallen from his hand, landing with a muted thud on the floor beside him. Sarah could hear the sound of his breathing, slow and deliberate, but there was no trace of remorse in his actions. He seemed almost detached, like he was observing the scene from a distance, as though Sarah's suffering didn't matter to him anymore. She struggled to stay conscious, the room darkening at the edges. The pain was unbearable, a constant, gnawing fire in her chest that threatened to consume her. But through the haze of agony, she held on to one thought. She couldn't give up. Not now. Not when she had a chance. The sirens were distant, but they were coming. They had to be. Please, she whispered into the phone. Please hurry. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, but it felt like an eternity before Sarah could hear the heavy footsteps of officers outside her bedroom door. Her body trembled uncontrollably, each breath a struggle as she tried to hold on to the thread of hope that was rapidly slipping away. The pain was unbearable, but in the deepest recesses of her mind, a single thought remained. I won't die like this. The door crashed open, and a flood of light poured in, cutting through the darkness of the room like a blade. Officers rushed inside, their movements swift and urgent, but Sarah barely registered their presence. Her body was growing colder, her vision narrowing to a single point. Michael, standing motionless at the foot of the bed, his eyes still fixed on her, as if he were waiting for the inevitable to unfold. Ma'am, stay with us, an officer called out, kneeling beside her. His hands were steady as they applied pressure to the wound, but Sarah could barely feel it. Her limbs were growing heavy, her head spinning. Is she still alive? Another officer asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Sarah tried to speak, to tell them everything, but the words caught in her throat. She was too weak, too broken. Her world was slipping away. And then, Michael spoke, his voice, cold, detached, as if recounting a mere observation. It was an accident, he said flatly. She was going to kill herself with the gun. I had to stop her. The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening. Sarah's heart sank as the weight of Michael's lie hung in the air. Was anyone going to believe her? As the officers continued to tend to Sarah, one of them stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he observed Michael. There was something about his calm, almost casual demeanor that set off alarms in the officer's mind. Sarah's blood stained the floor beneath her, but Michael's actions, the coldness in his voice, seemed out of place for someone claiming to have just suffered through an accident. "We'll get you help, ma'am," the officer said softly, his voice filled with sympathy. But even as he spoke, his gaze never left Michael. There was something about the way Michael stood there, unshaken, that felt wrong. Sarah's body was beginning to give out, but her mind was sharp, still clinging to the fragments of clarity. She could hear the conversation unfolding around her, the hushed voices of the officers as they questioned Michael. The paramedics arrived, quickly working to stabilize Sarah. She tried to focus, her weak hands trembling as she reached for the truth that had been buried beneath Michael's lies. It wasn't an accident, she wanted to scream. He shot me on purpose. But the words wouldn't come. Her vision blurred again, her breath coming in shallow gasps. But she knew this was the moment. The officers weren't buying Michael's story. They were asking the right questions now. They were starting to see through the facade he had so carefully constructed. As the paramedics lifted Sarah onto the stretcher, her heart beat wildly. She wasn't going to let Michael get away with this. Not this time. She was going to survive. And she was going to make him pay. Sarah's world was a blur of sirens, flashing lights, and hurried voices. Her body felt like it was being pulled in every direction, but her mind was clearer than it had been in the hours since the shot rang out. She was going to survive. But Michael's lies? They were unraveling with every passing second, and she was going to make sure he couldn't hide behind them. The hospital was a whirlwind. Nurses, doctors, and paramedics worked tirelessly to stabilize her, but Sarah's focus was fixed on one thing: Michael. She could still hear his voice, cold and detached, ringing in her ears. It was an accident. The words echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of how far he had gone to cover his tracks. As the doctors worked to stop the bleeding, Sarah's thoughts raced. How could he do this? Her own husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, had become the monster she never saw coming. Minutes later, the officers arrived at the hospital, their grim faces confirming what Sarah had already suspected. Michael's story wasn't holding up. The blood evidence didn't match his claim of an accident, and the forensic team was already piecing together the truth from the crime scene. They had found the gun right where Michael had claimed it to be, but there were too many inconsistencies. Sarah was too weak to speak, but her eyes told everything the officers needed to know. Michael's calm, emotionless demeanor, it had betrayed him. He hadn't shot her by accident. It had been murder. And now, there was no escaping the truth. As Sarah lay in the hospital bed, the days began to blend together. Her wounds were healing, but the emotional scars ran much deeper. The battle for her life was not over. The battle for justice had only just begun. Michael had been arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The investigation into his actions was relentless, and the evidence was damning. The detectives had uncovered key details that contradicted his story. The angle of the shot, the lack of defensive wounds, and Sarah's own testimony, though it was still too weak to make a full statement. At trial, the cold, calculated nature of Michael's lies came to light. His defense painted him as a man caught in a desperate moment, but the prosecution argued otherwise. They presented the chilling reality. Michael Mitchell had intentionally shot his wife, the woman he once swore to love and protect, driven by anger, frustration, and fear of losing everything. Sarah's voice was never heard directly in the courtroom, but her presence was undeniable. Her family, her friends, the community, everyone who knew her rallied behind her. And through their support, she found the courage to face the man who had destroyed her life. When the jury finally returned its verdict, the courtroom was silent. Michael Mitchell was found guilty of second-degree murder, and as he was led away in cuffs, Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served. And though her scars would never fully heal, she had found the strength to move forward. Thanks for watching, everyone. What do you think? Could you survive a situation like Emma's? Or deal with the shocking betrayal like Sarah? Let us know in the comments below if you've ever faced anything like this, or if you have a story you'd like me to share in a future video. Your stories matter, and I'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.